Beyond the Supernatural, by Dr. Ahmed Tawfik. Let me introduce myself. Dr. Rafat Ismail, former professor of hematology at S University and several universities across Europe and America. I'm in my 70s, unmarried, as my tumultuous life never gave me the chance to be like others. I have witnessed many things. I have opened Count Dracula's coffin, fought a werewolf in Romania, searched for the Loch Ness Monster in Scotland, encountered the terrifying Yeti in Tibet, answered the call of the Nadar in the dark cornfields, and met the zombies in Jamaica. I will recount all these experiences in detail in this series, but once again, I must warn those with weak hearts and sensitive souls to refrain from reading, thereby saving themselves hours of anxiety, fear, and dread of the dark. Today I will tell you my story with the vampire. At that time, I was a young man of 35, completely unaware of the supernatural world. I believed that science had explained everything. Of course, I was naive. I travelled to Britain to attend a hematology conference featuring elite scholars from all over the world. However, as is often the case, the lectures were not as captivating as one might hope. That day, I endured 4 of the dullest hours of my life, listening to endless talk about leukemia and thalassemia. The doctors in the audience had succumbed to that particular brand of boredom and intellectual stagnation that I like to call conference stupor. They had all lost feeling in their backs and limbs, their bodies seemingly fused to the chairs. Some passed the time by whispering to each other, covering their mouths like school children. Thank you. For a moment, these poor souls could not believe their ears. But the speaker had indeed concluded his lengthy lecture, and soon relieved sighs of gratitude filled the hall, followed by polite applause. The speaker was a distinguished elderly man named Richard Cummings. I had met him several times in Egypt and had been greatly impressed by him. He was a proud, imposing, and passionate man, deeply enamoured with history and art, especially the history of the pharaohs, which was our common ground. After the lecture, I approached him. He greeted me warmly, his face lighting up with joy. He even shook my hand, a rare gesture for an Englishman, before asking for my thoughts on his presentation. I lied politely, telling him it was fascinating. He then invited me to his countryside home in Yorkshire, claiming that I was a civilized man with a deep dedication to science. Thus, following strict English etiquette, I found myself stepping into the entrance of his beautiful English garden precisely at 7 in the evening. The moon cast a soft, gentle glow over the ivy vines draping the sloped roof of his house. In the garden, unfamiliar fragrances filled the air from flowers whose names I did not know. Inside, the house was simple yet elegant, a home of a devout Catholic family. The living room was adorned with a large collection of antique crosses and a grand painting of the Last Supper. His wife, a middle-aged woman, was polite and graceful, while his daughter Catherine, though a teenager, displayed remarkable maturity beyond her years. I realized just how religious they were when they recited grace before dinner. It made me feel ashamed for forgetting to say Bismillah before eating. I murmured, "In the name of Allah," from start to finish, and proceeded to fill my stomach with the visually appealing yet horrendously tasting dishes for which English cuisine was infamous across Europe. After dinner, in the cosy living room, Dr. Ra, Richard sat by the fireplace, smoking his pipe and sipping his coffee with sheer enjoyment. At that moment, life seemed as perfect as it could ever be. Dr. Richard said, "How does it feel to be a descendant of the pharaohs, those geniuses? I have studied their civilization and the immense contributions they made to the modern world. I feel ashamed that I have never visited Luxor, despite being so close to it. I truly believe that this generation will add nothing remarkable to the legacy of civilization. All we do now is consume what others have built. Sometimes I think the era of discovery has ended, and the era of development has begun." I smiled, unsure how to respond, and muttered, "Dr. Richard said that is true. Every legend has some basis in reality, and this is where the role of a scientist begins, not to merely contemplate it, but to search for its true origins. Take the legend of Count Dracula, for example. There are numerous historical clues, fascinating ones indeed. Blood, that mysterious red fluid, is the symbol of both life and death. It was discovered in ancient Indian rituals, the fanged mummies of China. The blood-drinking ceremonies in Mayan temples, where they consumed a mixture of blood, vinegar, and spices, and the turtle blood rituals among Native Americans. Consider how the vampire myth was an accepted belief during the Middle Ages, with various stories about expelling vampires as if they were actual creatures. And here, if we allow ourselves some intellectual flexibility, we might conclude that at some point in time, in some place, there truly existed nightmare beings that lived on blood, just like Dracula. Oh, the voice belonged to Catherine. She had just entered the room, overhearing the last sentence. Without a word, she quickly ascended to her room. Dr. Richard sighed and said, "That's for the best. Some things should not be discussed in front of women." Catherine then excused herself for the night. Dr. Richard put out his pipe and the room was engulfed in darkness, except for the soft, flickering glow of the fireplace. Then in a dramatic tone he muttered, "What terrifying conversations these are." He added, "Such a fitting atmosphere for the journey that awaits us tomorrow." A chill ran down my spine. The sight of the flames dancing in the fireplace evoked both warmth and fear within me. After this long evening, I returned to my hotel, my mind swirling with thoughts about this intriguing subject. "Doctor." Richard suddenly stopped in front of one of the paintings hanging on the wall, gazing at it intently. Then, in a hushed voice, he whispered, "I have spent long years researching this, alongside a fellow historian, and today I can finally say that we have proven, with material evidence, the existence of Count Dracula. The story, as everyone knows it, is about the Count who lived in Transylvania during the 14th century. He was evil in every sense of the word, but he was not one of the undead. However, an enthusiastic writer gave him the name Dracula, meaning the devil, and Bram Stoker immortalized him in his famous novel, which still sends shivers down people's spines to this day. Then came international cinema, with stars like Vincent Price and Lon Chaney completing the picture. And today I say with absolute certainty that Dracula truly existed, exactly as the stories have described him, without any exaggeration. To the Count's servant I said eagerly, "But we are men of science, and we know that what cannot be seen, heard, smelled, or comprehended simply does not exist." Dr. Richard smiled confidently, then walked to the corner of the room, opened a drawer, and took out a thick envelope filled with documents. He handed it to me and said, "Read these papers before you speak of science." Before I could respond, Mrs. Cummings entered with a cheerful expression. I thanked her for the dinner, trying to sound as refined as possible, and then we started a conversation about the weather. I also expressed my admiration for their home, especially the Last Supper painting hanging on the wall. She began explaining the story behind the painting and the expressions on the faces of those seated around the table. Then she suddenly asked me, "Do you know why Westerners consider spilling salt on the table a bad omen?" I shook my head, admitting my ignorance. She said, "Because in the painting the traitor has spilled salt in front of him. Look at his face. It bears all the sins of mankind, consumed by an evil from which he finds no escape." I was fully immersed in the discussion about the painting, but my mind was preoccupied with something else. The envelope in my hands, and the distance between me and my warm bed where I could read it. When I returned to the hotel, I lay down on the bed and examined the envelope Dr. Richard had given me. It was filled with old papers and photographs. One photo was of a strange ancient castle. Another showed a closed marble coffin. There was also a picture of something I couldn't quite understand, and another of a tall, bearded man's face painted in an old oil portrait. The fragile, yellowed paper contained a hand-drawn map in black ink of an unknown castle, riddled with underground tunnels marked with strange names I couldn't even decipher. Too many mysteries. Finally, I found a page written in English in Dr. Richard's handwriting. We spent months exploring the underground tunnels of Count Dracula's castle in Transylvania, a place authorities have prohibited tourists from visiting due to the risk of collapse. At last, we discovered the attached map, which led us to the family tombs of the Count in an ancient crypt, filled with dust and bats. We opened the coffins one by one until we found the mummy of the Count himself. Resting on his chest was an ivory box, inside which we discovered an old letter written by his servant for future generations. I write this letter for those who will come after me to warn them of a terrible danger. Evil has chosen this cursed land as its dwelling. Dracula was the first vampire born in this land. Among the peasants, the Count was infamous for his cruelty and tyranny, using an army of mercenaries to enforce his rule, earning him the title the Demonic One, or Dracula. Each evening, the Count began drinking a horrific mixture of pig's blood, wine, and spices, claiming it restored his youth. He delved into the study of dark magic, becoming more reclusive and strange. His features changed, his face grew elongated, and his voice took on the eerie howl of a wolf under the moonlight. He would leave the castle at night and return at dawn, isolating himself for hours in the castle's basement. He had even stopped eating food entirely. When I searched through books of magic, I found an explanation for his condition. That mixture he drank was leading him toward immortality in the most horrifying way. It transformed those who became addicted to it into human-like bats that fed on human blood at night, slept in coffins during the day, and perished when exposed to sunlight. I had to verify this myself. The next morning, I gathered my courage and descended into the castle's cellar. The coffins of his ancestors were stacked there, the stench of decay filling the air, while rats scurried about freely. I approached a marble coffin and found what I was searching for. The Count lay motionless, his face as pale as the dead, with fresh drops of blood still clinging to his lips. His eyes were open, staring blankly into the void. I stepped closer, summoning my courage. Slowly I pried open his mouth and saw 2 rows of sharp fangs, like those of a predator. A wave of terror paralyzed my mind. I ran in a frenzy, thinking only of escape. I even forgot to close the coffin. So, the Count had truly become a vampire, a danger to himself and everyone around him. The villagers had been right to make the sign of the cross whenever they passed the castle. This was the secret behind the old beggar's corpse found near the castle, his lifeless body lying on the ground, with 2 red puncture marks on his neck. This was why the Count had removed the white curtains and discarded all religious icons. This was the source of the terrifying howls that echoed through the castle on moonlit nights. I returned to my books of magic, desperately searching for a way to end this nightmare. He had not yet drained my blood. Perhaps he needed something else. I discovered that vampires could be killed, for they perished when exposed to religious symbols. Light, the color white, silver, and holy scriptures all could destroy them. However, the most effective method was to drive a wooden stake through their heart, followed by the recitation of the funeral prayer. The books warned that a vampire rises once every 100 years to spread terror, only to be slain by someone untouched by evil. And at that moment, I felt something strange in the room. Slowly, I lifted my head. There, standing in the doorway, blocking the exit, was the Count. He smiled, a sickly, yellow smile that sent chills down my spine. Night had fallen without me realizing it. When he awoke and saw his coffin left uncovered, he knew that I had discovered his secret. I stared at him in horror. His face no longer resembled the one I once knew. His fangs gleamed, his skin was pale and wrinkled, and the stench of sulphur emanated from him, exactly as described in the books of dark magic. He moved before the mirror, yet he cast no reflection. Even the candlelight in the room left no shadow of him on the wall. I screamed in terror, "My God, save me!" The Count flinched and stepped back for a moment. Seizing the opportunity, I dashed toward the door faster than I had ever run before. I rushed into my room, locked the door behind me, and collapsed onto the bed. In the final moment before I lost consciousness, I saw the door handle twitch, but the lock held firm. Yes, the Count had become an heir to evil on this earth. He was afflicted, and he knew it. I had made up my mind. I would end his suffering. I will kill him today. The books of magic say that he will perish at the hands of a man untainted by evil, and I am that man. I am the judge, the prosecutor, and the executioner in this trial. I will descend into his chamber, carrying a silver dagger, garlic, and, most importantly, my faith. And if I meet my demise, let whoever finds this letter learn what I have learned and be prepared for the Count's return every 100 years until one among us stands righteous and defeats him. The Count's servant. Year 1590. At the end of the letter, I found a brief note in Dr. Richard's handwriting. He stated that they had discovered the Count's mummy, with this warning resting on his chest. This meant that the servant had succeeded in his mission. The journal ended there. I switched off the lamp and rested my eyes in the darkness. So these myths are what occupy the mind of this great scholar. All this nonsense they spread in horror films about Indians, Spartans, and the mummies of China, mere superstition. I tried to amuse myself by imagining the form of evil in the world. A ghoul with red eyes, an octopus with 6 arms. I couldn't picture it. But for some reason I couldn't explain, the image of Judas's face in Da Vinci's painting wouldn't leave my mind. That miserable expression, the look of a sinner who knows only how to sin. I didn't know how, nor when, but I drifted into a deep slumber.